You're listening to a Rock Candy podcast.
Hey everybody, this is Matthew McConaughey. All right. You can tell it's me by that saying. Anyway, when I'm tired of listening to Dave Matthews Band sometimes, and my feet hurt from walking around barefoot, I like to go down to the pickle and boot shop and just hear Reese and Joe talking about stuff like ska. This music is ska. I love it.
Welcome to the 11T podcast.
What's up, unicorns? Welcome to this episode of 11D Life. I hope that your week is going as smoothly, is going swimmingly. I hope that your holiday season is giving you all the best that it has to offer you. This week, we have a bit of a shorter episode for you because this is part 2 of my conversation with Ronnie Martin of the band Joy Electric and recently of the band Just Ronnie Martin. If you missed out on the first half of the conversation that Ronnie and I had together, do not pass go. Head back into your podcast app and check out part 1 of this conversation because it's been one of my favorite ones that we've had on the show in a while. As always, we are very grateful for the time that you spend with us, for allowing us into your life. And so we try not to take your time for granted. So we split this into a 2-parter episode to make it easier to digest. Huge hugs and high fives to everybody over at the 11D Life Facebook group. You are an amazing group of unicorns, and I feel very honored to have you in my life. Also, if you are looking for a place to talk about some of the things you are hearing on the podcast, we have a Discord server that is all things 11D, 11D Life, and Rock Candy. You can get to that in the show notes and find your new best friend there. As always, thank you so much for the streams, likes, and hearts that you are giving to us on your Spotify app. We absolutely love it and cannot thank you enough for doing that for us. This is a short episode, so I'm going to leave it with that short intro. I hope that you enjoy the second half of my conversation with the one, the only Ronnie Martin. So the stuff that you're doing now, it sounds like you're using samples.
Well, I'm not using samples. Well, I'm technically using samples. Yeah, I should say I'm using, so for the drums in particular, I use an old Roland 80s drum machine, with the big, that has the big Phil Collins gated reverb snares, which I've always, believe it or not, those have always been some of my favorite drum sounds because I grew up in that era where, that was the production of that era.
Right.
And so for this record, the thought was, I want that drum sound. I want to have massive drum sound. And I had the right guy to mix the record that specializes in taking those sounds, making them even bigger.
Oh,
and
great.
He did. So it was very satisfying.
That's awesome.
Because now that I'm an old man, I can sort of let my guard down with the purity a little bit and the purism, I should say. And it was really enjoyable for sure.
So like when you were mixing the new stuff, are you like the weird neurotic artist like in the session with the mix engineer? Because most mix engineers that I talk to, and I know because I mix a lot of records, I don't want the artist in the room with me. I don't want them over my shoulder, like listening to what's happening. I want them to let me do my job, and then we'll come back in and like make notes. Was this a thing where you were kind of like very hands-on with the process, or was there a lot of trust, or a little bit of both?
Yeah, no, totally hands off. Okay. I don't have any desire to be anywhere near a mix session at all. I don't enjoy it. And the guy who mixed the record, I did some work with him years ago, totally trusted him.
Yeah.
I just, so I sent him the tracks and I said, here's some songs I want you to listen to before you mix the album.
Yeah.
I said, here's the vibe. And I said, just go for it. You're going to do a fantastic job. And I mean, this guy, I would say with the exception of maybe one song, every first pass, that was it for me. I was like, don't touch it. It's good. I love it.
What a great feeling. God, I love those moments.
It was a great moment. And I'm incredibly not picky about those things now. So, I mean, even his translation of like, well, okay, if I would have been in the room with him, I probably would have raised up that sound a little bit. I would have put down that sound a little more, and I would have, but it's like, but that's his translation. I want his interpretation of that. Yeah. And so it was really fun to be able to say, gosh, I love that. And he was the one that was like, okay, I didn't mean, this was just to make sure I was on the right track. And I was like, no. You could tweak with it. I'm not telling you can't touch it. I go, but if you don't touch it, I'm totally good. I love it.
Wow.
And he's just I don't know. He's just a very skilled guy. So
yeah, you quickly turned into like the dream artist that everyone would want to work with.
Well, I like being the easiest guy in the room too. The really low maintenance guy that just goes, man, it sounds great. You could do 7 other passes, and at some point we got to just pick one. So
that's your extrovert part. Sort of make sure everybody knows I'm a cool dude.
That is my Enneagram 4 extroverted. Like, I really do want you happy. I don't want you to walk away from the session thinking, oh man, he's that guy. Yeah, I would much rather be that. Oh man, this was just fun. Let's do it again.
Yeah. I love that. I know that I've had you on here for an hour. I have a few more questions, but I definitely don't want to monopolize your time. And
yeah, absolutely. I have a few more minutes. So okay, absolutely. That'd be great.
I would love to know, like, one of the things that a lot of artists talk about when they come on the show, or that I'm interested in, is, do you remember the absolute dark night of the soul for your band? Like, what was the worst moment you can imagine, or that you can remember within your musical career, where you just kind of thought, everything's going to shit. We might not make it out of this. If I go home right now, pack it all up and flip all the switches off, it doesn't matter. I'm so put out. Or if you're like me, that happened once a week.
I was going to say, every time the new record dropped, it was one of those moments. It's such a great question. I think, we were really, I believe in the sovereignty of God. So I'm a man of faith. So I believe that, the Lord has his hand over the events of our lives. And so I believe all of this was watched over and was, ordained. But having said that, there was so much angst in all that joy, all those Joy Electric years. And I think we were in a large way, and I think most people would agree with this, we were in a scene that we had no business being in, with absolutely no support. And what I mean by no support is we had great support from our label, who were amazing. Right. Brandon, Ebel, Jim Worthen. Mm-hmm. I hope they hear this, because, I'm so grateful. They stuck with me for all those records. They invested a lot of money. Yeah. They didn't get any of it back. They supported me. All that was amazing. I didn't deserve it, and they were so kind. And it was, they put it out because they saw the value in it as an artistic endeavor, knowing that, they weren't going to be able to pay their bills with Joy Electric, And so I'm really grateful for that. But having said that, there was no place for us to go to receive any sort of like a wider range of acceptance. That was never going to happen. And I think knowing that year after year and continuing just to walk down that path, it was the only path we had in front of us. And so, just taking those opportunities and to continue to walk down that path and making these strange art records for this, this contemporary Christian music scene. Yeah. There was so much frustration. There was so much angst. There were so many dark nights of the soul, because on one hand, it was, this is what it is. Yeah. And there's really no blue skies. There's no sort of brighter horizons in front of you. And I'm talking about in terms of commercial appeal and playing to wider audiences and all of those things. And at some point, you just know that that's the case, but this is where you're at. These are the opportunities that have been afforded you. They're not insignificant, right. But it is what it is. But you're walking a tightrope because you feel pressure, because you're looking at other styles of music and other artists who are able to sell 5 times as many records as you are, which translates into bigger advances, bigger budgets, bigger venues. Yeah. And you're just in a situation where you're like, that almost is impossible for that to happen. Yeah. Unless we make this incredible turn. And the problem is that you saw bands who made these incredible seismic artistic shifts, and it didn't benefit them. It didn't increase anything. And so to me, it was always like, you just got to do what you want to do, and, let the chips fall. and see how God might work in work in that way. And it just was what it was. But it felt like constant pressure.
Yeah.
We wanted to do better, because we wanted to gain more acceptance. We wanted to just be in the club with everybody else doing all the stuff.
Yeah.
And we wanted the label to be happy, you know. We didn't want them to be losing money hand over fist, which is what they did for 15 years with us. So there was just that almost inconsolable pressure with that. And at some point you just got to give up, but the realities are there, because it's still a market, and it's still a business, and it's still driven by money. And there's nothing wrong with that, because that's the way these things work. So I'm not even the bitter artist that just thinks, oh no, everybody should bow down and lose all the money, and because I'm just the most purest artist that ever existed.
Right.
It's like, no, I understand the way these things work. I mean, these things need to function.
Yeah.
I just wish that I could have accepted that earlier, and then just enjoyed the process of where we were at, instead of where we wished we were at. And that was difficult. It was just a really difficult run for me personally. And again, that would be the dark side of what we're talking about. It definitely doesn't account for, oh man, so many great times, so many great people, so many great moments, so many great opportunities with festivals and shows and people we got to meet. I mean, I don't even have, we would need, 5 days to talk all that. It's incredible. So that's just, you asked about some of the darkness of it.
Yeah, of course.
And that's really what it was for me. It was just so filled with angst and pressure, and just wishing things could be different, but knowing they probably weren't.
That's so cathartic for me to hear that was your struggle, because I remember some of the weirdest moments that we had was being on a label, and then you kind of thinking that you're all friends with everyone on the label, because we all come from the middle of nowhere places in America. And somehow we all end up here in Nashville, sort of doing our thing, palling around, making friends, yada, yada, yada. And then all of a sudden the conversation takes a turn, and it's like, oh, wait a minute, they spent how much on your album? Or then you hear somebody else be like, oh yeah, well, they just dropped like 40 grand on a music video. And we're like, they didn't spend that on our entire album. Right. And all of a sudden the comparison becomes the thief of joy, and everyone's is gone. And
that's a great word.
And it's just like, and it just you're creating your own reality of suffering. Whereas like, you're exactly right. If you could just go back and redo it, it's like, none of us really deserve to be here. Like, I don't even know if any of us could make it in the mainstream market. We happen to have this set of beliefs. We happen to have like gotten lucky in an email or two. And then now we're all here. Let's just like do what's in front of us and enjoy it.
Absolutely.
It still terrifies me that I may get to the end of my life and still feel like I haven't quite got that, because it's like constantly waking up at these different moments where things get really bad, and like trying to remind yourself in the moment when things are things are super bad. It's a dark night of the soul. Trying to remind yourself that this is where the good stuff is. And this is where all of your greatest stories come from. This is where all of your empathy is birthed.
That's well said.
Yeah, it's I don't know.
Really, really well said. I think one of the angst that, when you start to, how would I phrase this? We were, I don't know, third wave when it comes to like Christian artists, if you sort of section these things off in terms of eras. And I think the problem was that the Christian market in particular it can only be market driven. There's not really any space for art in terms of just the musical side of it. And again, because it's so small, and it can't, what Tooth and Nail did was groundbreaking in the sense that they said, well, we believe everything we're doing is art on some level. Yeah. And we're going to support artists that, are paying for the other artists, are big selling artists, but we're also going to give value to the ones that, are not going to shift units. That was groundbreaking in and of itself, but it was also contained within sort of the culture that they created as a label. Right. It didn't really go beyond that though, because when especially when you're a label that then gets EMI distribution or Sony distribution, well, now you've just changed that, right? Because now you're part of you're part of something bigger that is now looking at things that you're saying you're okay with that they're saying they're not okay with. I think my point with this is that it seems like, or it was this way back then, where again, it's, when you talk about the Christian music industry, it's not very old. It's very underdeveloped. And it is something that is there to, in essence, shift units, because the whole point is to get product in the hands of people, mostly younger people, that is safe for them to listen to. So there's a mission behind it. And then there's a business model behind it that stirs and moves the mission and creates a movement out of it. So if you're something, if you're something that isn't easy to hand to somebody younger, that gives them an alternative to something that they're getting out there, what place do you have in the industry? Well, they haven't created a place for that, right? We don't have Christian art houses.
I mean, for me, that place is just in the world with everything else. I mean, it's in the bin with everything else. Like for me, it's very well documented, my my qualms with the Christian music industry and how weird and off-putting, and there's a reason that we're not part of it anymore and all these different things. But one of the main ones is that it starts with this premise that somehow we get to decide what is good and evil, what is sacred and secular. It felt very much like, this is the first story in your damn Bible. This is eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This is deciding that you're going to, it's creating separateness. You're increasing these ideas of separateness between this is holy, this is of God, and this other thing over here, this human expression makes me uncomfortable, so it must somehow not be. And that always felt like this cognitive dissonance in my mind that I'm like, well, I can't, then why does the Christian music industry need to exist? It's not important to me that I be creating art that's sanitized for everyone, because that's not a true representation. Like, you're an analog purist. The more that I have gone through this whole thing, the more I'm like, when I'm writing songs, I just want to be able to say what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling and what came out in that moment. And for me, that's been a practice in the purity of my own thoughts and in being able to be honest with myself and with people around me. And I feel like that doesn't necessarily exist when you take a faith and you commodify it and you turn it into an industry. I totally understand how business works and that, you got to spend money to make money. And if something's not selling, it's not selling. But starting with this idea that what we're selling somehow gets you closer to Christ, or is more acceptable to him, or is somehow sanitized and safe for your kids to listen to. I always sort of felt like it was just a false binary, because the things that have meant the most to me in my life were the things that were kicking the tires on culture. Like the stuff that you were doing was hit me in that way. And I remember my parents being super, super weirded out by all of the Joy Electric stuff. And it was my own, this is just such a small little subculture in which this is happening. So it's not even important. But even something like that, you going against the norms within that subculture, and me having to be rebellious against my parents and being like, no, I love this shit. This is my jam. And I'm going to hide the CD. I'm going to get it off Napster. I'm going to whatever you're trying to do right now, it's never going to work. And then now, sorry.
No, not at all. I think everything you're saying is so good. And I really resonate with it. And I think, I think nobody made me do what I did. So I can make a case that, whatever the Christian industry is, maybe it shouldn't exist. Well, I don't know, Sure. I certainly didn't have to operate within its confines. Those are just the opportunities that were given to me because I grew up in the church. Should there have ever been a Christian music industry? Man, we could talk about that. Why wasn't it just, and it essentially is, I mean, there probably should be some level of praise and worship music out there, right? Because that does actually, to me, in my opinion, I think that's something that can be something that gives God glory. It's something for the good of the church. And maybe there needs to be, there needs to be a way for that to get out there, right? So maybe you could justify an industry if you're talking about something that you want to give glory to Christ in that particular way that serves the church. Maybe that's a way that some sort of commodifying, would be justified. So we're talking about all these different aspects of these things.
Sure.
And, at the end of the day, like all industry, it's just going to go sour, in some ways. There's people working in the industry that, whose motives and whose mindset is not all in sync with the person who has the more pure motives and mindset. And it's just all over the map, and I think, I think at the end of the day, I'm not going to blame the industry for choices that I made to be a part of it, even if I'm critical of it. Because I could have easily said, hey, you know what? I'm going to spend the rest of my day sending demos to Mute Records because that's the label I should be on.
Yeah.
And they're probably never going to sign me because I'm too derivative of all of their artists or, whatever. But really, that's where I should be because there's an audience there that would actually appreciate what I'm doing. But getting my foot in the door there, well, that's always the challenge, right? How do you do that? I don't know. I mean, I don't know how to get on the label that's signed Depeche Mode. I don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
Do I want to be on that label? I do, but those doors haven't been open to me. So I'm going to be just held under the confines of the doors that open to me, whether I agree with it philosophically or not. And there were many things I didn't agree with philosophically, but yet I was still there with my feeble offerings.
Yes.
Meager offerings. And
when you're thirsty, you don't care what the water's laced with. You just know you need water.
You just know you need water, right? So all those things, all those are really well stated points, but the fact is that it's the industry's changed, hasn't it? We're not talking about what it was like 20 years ago. It's not like that anymore, right? It doesn't exist the way it did back in 99, Yeah,
I think we definitely saw it change, and I can't speak to what it would have been. Like, I was very young in 1999. I started getting into all those bands around that time. So I was just consuming product. And at the time, because you had people like Tooth and Nail putting really good shit out that didn't sound like the other stuff that was coming from other labels, like when you were shopping in Christian bookstores and stuff, it was like you kind of wanted, like you knew that you didn't quite fit into that culture. And so Tooth and Nail was kind of like you're in, and you didn't have to be like a mega Christian. You didn't have to be into like DC Talk. It was like this whole other group of people that you sort of fit into, and that music was reflective of how you were feeling and how you were navigating the world at the time. And I think that as many things as I say like awful about the Christian music industry, whatever, you're right. I chose to consume all of that stuff. I chose to be a part of those groups, and it formed me.
Yeah.
I feel like what it ended up doing initially was it would planted these seeds that would eventually cause my exit from Christianity entirely.
Yeah.
And that's like probably, a discussion for another time.
Sure.
But as good as it gets is as bad as it gets most of the time in life. And so I would love to put this to you, not to like bring the mood down and like sour
not
anything.
At all.
Because I love this kind of stuff. I'm very grateful that you're willing to have these conversations with me.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for talking to me.
In the middle of what's happening culturally and has been happening culturally for about the past 10 years, evangelical kids like me, or kids that grew up in the evangelical Protestant tradition of Christianity, and then saw a lot of it, not just here, but overseas, like seeing what America was exporting to other countries and how these beliefs played out and what that looked like. And like every single week having to shake hands with a youth pastor that like somebody would come up to you later and be like, oh yeah, he's like screwing some kids in the youth group, or there's this or that and the other thing. And it was just like, that was your life. It was just constantly behind the scenes of the biggest names and thought leaders in Christianity, and being completely underwhelmed by the quality of any of it, and just seeing that in most instances it was completely like ego driven. And then now, like, we're starting to see the fruits of like the fall of these different mega pastors and stuff. It's like a new one every week, and people like leaving the faith. I'm absolutely one of them. So I'm not trying to Trojan horse you in this conversation.
Not at all.
But I wonder what your take is. And I wonder if you have a specific set of empathy for the hundreds of thousands of teens to 30 somethings who are leaving evangelical Christianity because they can't deal with the cognitive bias of this is what it feels like Christianity says it was, and then this is how it plays out in culture, and they end up being two different things.
Yeah. Well, gosh, Matt, that's a huge question, and I'll answer the first part of it that you asked, and I have a lot of empathy for that, and I have a lot of understanding. As somebody who grew up in the evangelical bubble, Christian school, church, 4 days a week, Christian clothing, Christian cereal, Christian everything.
I totally missed out on the Christian cereal.
You know what I mean? It was
Christ flakes.
Yeah, exactly. It was the coming up in the 70s and 80s, that was the era where everything was, commercialized. It was like we have our own world that we have built and created, and we can be safe, And so I think for my generation, Gen Xers, and then, more specifically, I think for millennials who have sort of seen who have seen really the breakdown, I think, and to the hypocrisy. There's always been hypocrisy. And just the lack of authenticity with people who weren't really living what they claimed they believed. I think I can, I don't feel detached from that. I feel I understand that. I've had my own experiences with, the church and with people of faith and saying one thing and being another thing. And so I have a lot of empathy for that, for sure. I think, I think the thing that sticks out to me the most, I think in my journey is, I think what we've seen in evangelicalism is just what's interesting to me is it's something that in a lot, and we've seen this politically over the last 5 years, right? Where we saw this confluence of politics and conservatism and Christianity, and those things didn't happen overnight. Those things have been being built,
right?
And they're bankrupt. And we've seen a particular kind of bankruptcy happen within the church, and we've seen people become incredibly disillusioned with that, which is understandable. And I think disillusion is a good word. Sure. It's a good thing, right? Yeah. Deconstruction, it can be a good thing, right? Because what it means is that things aren't illusory to us anymore. We're actually seeing something that is real instead of believing a false narrative about something that isn't, right? Sure. And so I think we've kind of seen, we've kind of seen evangelicals stripped of the clothing that it's been trying to wear all these years, and we've seen it to be naked, and we've seen it to be something that has been damaging and abusive, and actually not at all like Jesus Christ at the end of the day. And so I think to be able to look at that and to notice it and to acknowledge that, I think is a really good thing. Yeah. I think it's a really good thing for these generations to go, hey, this is actually not Christianity. This is not actually like when we open the Gospels, this is not actually what we're seeing. This is not like a life that's like patterned after the life that we see Jesus having lived. This doesn't align with that. Right. And I think that's a good thing for us to recognize and just call time out on and go, nope, that's not it right there. You guys have been trying to pull the wool over our eyes, and you know what? The light needs to come into this. This needs to be exposed. Yeah. And I think we've seen that happen over the last 4 to 5 years. And I think, it's understandable to see some of the responses to be one of, hey, I got to walk the other way. I got to get away from that. About a church that has patterned itself, evangelicalism that has patterned itself after the world, in terms of what it has been trying to seek, what it's tried to become, and what its own heart has been reshaped to be over the last 30, 40, 50 years. I mean, to me, and this is just what I would say, the answer is to actually go back to who Jesus actually is, and actually go back to what the gospel is actually claiming to be, and seeing what kind of truth that will be uncovered for you. Because it could be, that this narrative that we've been given, this evangelical narrative that we've been given in a large sense, it's not hard to see that it's fallen off the rails. Yeah. But to me, the answer isn't just if you have an evangelicalism that has patterned itself out of the world, what I don't want to do is then just turn and fall back into the side of the world that is patterning itself after. Right. What I would want to do is say, well, hold on. Like if any part of this is true, and I feel like I've been given the false narrative of it, or I've been given just a glimpse of some of the truths, but then it hasn't really lived itself out in a way that makes sense when I go back to the person of Jesus. Maybe I'm right in that it has been a false narrative, and maybe I need to go back and explore what this actually is all about. Because at the end of the day, we're going to end up worshiping something. We're going to end up adopting some gospel in our lives. So the question is always, is it truth, or is it something that just masquerades as truth? And man, I don't want to be, I want to be disillusioned. I want to be disillusioned. I don't want to live under illusion,
Are you afraid to be wrong? Are you afraid of being wrong? Or do you feel like your faith is your thing? It's like, doesn't matter. I have faith in this present moment right now.
Yeah. I mean, that's such a great question. When I look back at my faith journey, I mean, I can see so many ways that I've been wrong. I mean, so many ways. And I think embracing those views that maybe were given to you through tradition that just, again, didn't really line up with the gospel. It's being able to say, hey, you know what, at the end of the day, what have I been believing? And have I been believing something that has been reshaped and twisted by the culture?
Sure.
Or am I believing, really the heart of what, Jesus was preaching and communicating? I just want to get back to that heart, because it's a very beautiful, humble, always willing to be wrong message, Yeah. I mean, the whole point of being able to say, hey, you know what, man, I have been wrong about this, and I don't like the way that you've been treated through this, and I don't like the way that the effect that this has had on your heart. I think a spirit of humility allows us to always say, hey, I want to be the first guy in the room to say that I missed this, that I'm wrong, and that I want to come back from this, and I hope you can forgive me. And I think that's a big piece that we're lacking. We've kind of seen, 4 years of Mr. Trump has kind of told us that, there's a twisted evangelicalism out there that I would say just doesn't represent Jesus Christ, and at the same time, these are just people too. And, how do I humble myself in the sense that I want to understand what their narrative is and why they've gotten to the place they've gotten to, while also understanding that that's a super dangerous place that they've got.
Yeah.
I don't want to have anything to do with that in terms of, how I live my life, how I view other people.
Yeah.
But humility is the only thing that gets you to that place,
Right.
And it's hard. It's hard, man.
Well, it's
a lot of rambling right there for you.
No. It's good stuff. It's really great. And I have to imagine that you have had your heart broken many times.
Well, I don't know. I'm growing a lot. I'm really, I struggle with a lot of things. And man, you talk about dark nights of the soul, and, those include, dark nights of the soul, not just about music, but about faith. And, yeah. So, I mean, I'm no different than anybody else. I mean, the Lord has just, the Lord keeps hanging on to me, and, I believe he's good, and I believe he's kind, and I believe he has something for all of this mayhem that we're seeing in the evangelical community. I still believe that the answer is not to pull away.
Sure.
It could be to pull away from evangelicalism. I mean, I'm with you on that.
Sure.
But to me, the answer isn't to pull away from Jesus, but to press in deeper and see, hey, who is this person? And what are these words that he told us? And have we strayed? Have we just as a culture strayed from those words? And I would say, in terms of evangelicalism, the answer is it couldn't be a more resounding capital, all caps, YES, So I want to acknowledge that. And I want to say that there is another way. There's a better way. And again, and disillusionment has a lot to do with that. It can be a really good thing, I think. So
no, I appreciate you taking the time to articulate all of that.
I wish I would have done it better, but thanks for the opportunity.
You only get one podcast, Ronnie, and you blew it. Oh man, no, that's fantastic. I think I could do this. I could do this with you ad nauseum.
Oh man,
and I appreciate the time. I'll leave you with one last thing.
Yeah,
if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that I didn't get to, or a question that you wanted me to ask that I didn't?
I don't think so. I really I thought you, I thought you did such a great job, and I think you asked so many good questions. I think you asked questions that I wouldn't have even imagined being asked, and I really appreciate that. So that's I mean that that's enjoyable.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm
that's
so
really
glad.
sweet.
Yeah. Do you by any chance still have that Juno 6 that I sold you like 10 years ago? Do you remember that?
I do.
Okay.
I gave it to somebody, a friend of mine named Andrew Horton, who still has it in his studio. And we do some work together every once in a while. So it's
awesome.
It's not in my personal hands, but it's with one of my personal friends.
Sure. Oh yeah, it doesn't matter one way.
But
or
I love
other.
that Juno. So I love all the Junos. You know. So.
Yeah. That's fantastic, man. Well, dude, thank you so much. And I'm pretty sure we're going to have to turn this into a two-parter.
Oh, man. Yeah.
And so we'll just say until next time.
Sounds awesome. I appreciate it so much, man.
Eleventy Life is a production of Rock